again to another episode. Today, Doug Noll, a renowned lawyer, over 22 years of experience, writer, book editor, works for Authority Magazine. Doug, how are you today?
I'm great, Julio. How are you?
Very good. Wonderful to have you here finally. It's been a while we've been trying.
That's okay. We made it work. It's all good.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Doug, for sake of the audience, so if someone asks you who is Doug Noll, how would you express yourself? How you started all this? From your own journey, your vision, and how did you get where you got today?
Well, it's a bit of a journey, that's for sure. So briefly, I'm a native Californian, U.S., and I grew up in Southern California. I went back east to Dartmouth College. And then when I was finished with college, I came back to California and went to law school. After law school, I moved to Central California, where I live now. And I was a commercial and business trial lawyer for 22 years. I joined the firm that I was ultimately was with for 22 years in September of 1978 and tried my first civil jury trial in October of 1978. And I was a trial lawyer. And that's what I did for 22 years. And then in mid-career, I began to realize that I was not serving people the way that I wanted to. So I ended up going back to school and earning my master's degree in peacemaking and conflict studies, and left the practice of law in 2000 to become a peacemaker and a mediator. And so I've been doing that for the last 25 years. And along the way, I developed a very powerful set of tools that allows you to calm any angry person in 90 seconds or less. And that led to, with my colleague Laurel Coffer, co-founding the Prison of Peace Project in 2010, where we went into maximum security prisons. Our very first prison was the largest, most violent women's prison in the world. And we started in, I think it was March of 2010, training 15 women, all serving life and long-term sentences, how to be peacemakers and stop prison violence. And today, Prison of Peace is international. We're 15 prisons in California, the Connecticut prison system, 14 or 15 prisons in Greece, 3 prisons in Italy, and was just slowly starting to expand out around the world. And what I do today, I've written 4 books. I'm working on my 5th book. And my 4th book is De-Escalate, How to Calm an Angry Person in 90 Seconds or Less. And today I spend my time helping people resolve disputes as an arbitrator and as a mediator, and also teaching people how to never have a fight or argument again in their life. And so clients engage me when they want to master the skills that will allow them to never, ever have a fight or argument with anybody again in their life, and be able to enter into any intense situation with calm, confident compassion, and know exactly what to say and how to say it, knowing that within a couple of minutes, everything is going to be calmed down. And that's it.
It's really remarkable. It's a huge skill and a diverse journey, as you said. So, what could you tell us about your experience when you started to visit these maximum security prisons? I mean, for sure, it's a huge experience. I mean, can you
it was probably and has been the most important work I've done in my life. I was active training in prisons in California and Connecticut for 10 years, from 2010 to the outbreak of the pandemic in 2020. And then we spent the summer of 2020 filming our entire curriculum, using people that we had trained in prison who had been released on parole to help us. So we had six of our former incarcerated students being filmed with us. And so we filmed our entire curriculum, and now the curriculum is available on Blu-ray discs to any prison in the world that meets our requirements. So it was extremely powerful for me to walk into a prison. I did not practice criminal law. I had no contact with the criminal justice system as a lawyer, and work with these people who most of them were murderers, and teaching them these skills, these very powerful skills that I had developed, and watching them transform before my very eyes. And I mean, it's I got to do this.
Yeah, sure.
I got to. So we worked in the women's prison, Valley State Prison for women, for 3 years, and then it transformed to a men's prison. And then we went back in and started teaching men in that prison. And one of my very first students was a young man by the name of Daniel Henson. He's serving a life sentence because he murdered 3 or 4 family members when he was 14 years old. He was severely abused. And so, of course, he was sentenced to prison. And I worked with him for 3 years as he became a leader in prison of peace. And I got this letter from him. It's a short letter. I got this short letter from him yesterday. And this is a man who's been in prison since he was 15 years old.
Amazing.
And
how old is he now?
He's probably he's at least in his mid to late 40s. But let me read the letter. I got this letter just
sure, absolutely.
Dear Pop Daddy Doug, hello, been a while. Sorry for the lack of correspondence. Hope you're well and Pop is thriving. I found your address and thought I'd send some updates your way. I earned my Bachelor of Arts degree, graduated from Fresno State University summa cum laude in May of 2024. Our ceremony was in October of 2024. The Fresno State president, 40 professors and staff came. It was a big deal. I made it into a master's program. However, the funding was not approved. I'll enclose the letter and I'll keep trying. Had my first parole hearing in 2022, 5-year denial. I'll go back in 2027. In the meantime, I'm up for resentencing in Merced, so we'll see how that goes. Thank you for all you've poured into my life. You and Pop set the foundation for all of my accomplishments. You gave me foundational life skills, communication skills, emotional management skills, etc. Thank you. All my regards to you and Laurel. Daniel.
Congratulations to him and to yourself and all the work that was achieved. I mean, it's remarkable because for people to try to understand, I mean, I cannot express, the exact feeling, but I'm sure for a person that spends all his life practically in closed walls with no communication with the outside practically, to achieve that is remarkable.
It is remarkable, and his story is not the only one. We've had over 700 of our students in California serving life sentences released on parole. Not one of them has reoffended.
Amazing. So, Doug, how did he got here? I mean, was it trained skills because of the experience that you have in ongoing, or these skills you had them already, from previous time of the experience? How did it happen?
Well, the way Prison of Peace started was my colleague Laura Coffer, who is a lawyer and mediator in Los Angeles, received a letter from a woman serving a life sentence without possibility of parole at Valley State Prison for Women, which at that time was the largest, most violent women's prison in the world, asking Laurel if she would come in and train the women serving life sentences in the prison who were part of what they called a networking group, how to stop prison violence. And Laurel received the letter and she was standing in her mailbox and she called me because we had known each other for a number of years. She also knew that I had a deep academic background in restorative justice and human conflict. I was a secondary black belt, so there's a security issue. And I also lived about an hour and 15 minutes away from the prison. So she called me in August of 2009 and said, "Hey, let me read this letter to you." And she read the letter to me and she said, "What do you think we should do?" And I said, "I think we should do this." And so that's how the journey began. And we devised a curriculum. We wrote a curriculum that was unlike any other peacemaking or mediation curriculum ever devised. We recognized that our students, people serving life sentences in prison, probably had no skills at all around peacemaking. And so we had to teach them around 250 different skills before we could even begin to teach them about mediation. So as it evolved, the curriculum evolved. We learned, we made mistakes, and learned along the way. And our students taught us, and we taught them. And eventually, for the first 5 years, we weren't paid. We gave up our professional practices to do this work. It was really rough financially. And then finally, in 2016, we started getting grants from the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation. To pay us to do the work, and that helped. That began to help. Although we were making about 1/10 of what our professional rates would be, and once we started getting the grants from the department, we were able to expand into other prisons. For 3 years, I was working at a place called Corcoran State Prison, 100 feet from Charles Manson's cell. So I was working in the belly of the beast, in one of the darkest prisons in California. Again, training men how to stop prison violence, and it was a really deep, profoundly transformative experience for me. I mean, when you're working in prison, this is not a corporate conference center where you're not really not. You're working in a.
I cannot even imagine what is the feeling. I mean, I never been inside one, so I have no idea at all.
It was.
I can imagine that the experience is quite high.
It was very different. In the Corcoran, on our very first day of training, we had 14 individual cages in a semicircle around us, and we were sitting in front of them all. And these men were all shackled and in cages, and we were teaching them, beginning to teach them prison of peace. I mean, eventually they came out of the cages and out of the shackles, but in the beginning, that's the way it was. Until the correctional authorities were satisfied that we were not going to.
How did you felt when you were teaching them those skills in such conditions? I mean, what was the impression for you?
I thought, all right, here we are. This is different. They're here to learn, and we're here to teach. So let's just jump into it and get started, and hope we can keep them engaged, and hope that they can learn. And they did. They were engaged, and they did learn, and it changed their lives forever.
Amazing. How do you actually, start these skills, or how do we engage with them? For people, as you wrote on a book for everyone to know, the book De-Escalate is for sale already in the market. If you could just tell us a bit of pitch of the contents of the book, how do people actually do not get angry or de-escalate for those 90 seconds?
So the story begins in 2005, and now I've been a peacemaker and a mediator for 5 years, and the one skill I did not have was how to calm angry people. Even in my master's degree, being taught by some of the most brilliant people in the world, and I mean they were brilliant, they didn't have the skill sets to calm people down. They were relying on old concepts that really didn't work very well. But I had been studying neuroscience, and in 2005, I was confronted with a very difficult mediation, and the thought came to me, listen to the emotions, not the words. So I did that, and I turned this very fractious, difficult conflict into reconciliation and peace in 4 hours. And it was kind of remarkable to watch. And in fact, it was stunning how the transformation unfolded over 4 hours. And I realized that what I'd done, but I didn't understand why it worked. So I began testing it in other conflicts, and I began to get the same results, even though I was really kludgy at it. Well, 2 years later, a brain scanning study came out of UCLA, out of Matthew Lieberman's lab. And in that scanning study, he demonstrated why this technique called affect labeling worked. And what he showed was that when you label emotions, and I'll explain how to do it in just a second, when you engage in this skill, the emotional centers of the brain are inhibited, while at the same time a part of the brain called the right ventrolateral prefrontal cortex is activated. And the whole process takes between 90 and 120 seconds, and no human brain can resist it. We're all hardwired for this. So that if you get upset and I start affect labeling you, even if you want to remain upset, you can't. You will calm down. You have to, because that's the way your brain's wired. And once I read that study and understood that this is not some stupid little pop psychology trick, but is really based on hard science, that gave me a lot more confidence to begin to teach it. And so when we started the Prison of Peace Project in 2010, we based the whole curriculum on the ability to listen to emotions rather than to words. And that was our foundational skill going in. And then we built from that, we built up all the other skills that our students needed to learn. And then, of course, I began to train and teach outside of prison, teaching people how to do this. And that led to my fourth book, De-Escalate, which came out in 2017. And in that book, I lay out the history of affect labeling, the science, and then how to do it. So affect labeling can be described in 3 very simple steps. You're confronted with an angry person. Maybe that person is angry at you. Maybe they're angry at somebody else. It doesn't matter. You're going to do, the first thing you're going to do is you're going to ignore all the words. Whatever they're saying, you're just going to ignore it. It becomes white noise. Don't listen to them. Then the second step is you're going to sit in silence, empty your mind, and you're going to let your brain read the other person's emotional experience. And then within a couple of seconds, emotions will start coming into you. You'll start getting emotional words of what they're feeling. And I train people how to do this. Emotions are data, just like numbers on a spreadsheet. And I teach people how to read emotions and how to think about emotions as a set of data. And in fact, we even learn an emotional matrix of 7 layers of emotions. And so that's part of what I teach. So once you've got this matrix figured out, then you just sort of plug in the emotions as you're reading them. And then the third step is, and this is the part that's really weird, is that you tell people what they're feeling, and you don't use an I statement, and you don't ask questions. So you would say, I would say something, if I were to affect label you, and just see how this lands, Julio. So Julio, man, you are really frustrated. You're angry. You're pissed off. You feel completely disrespected. You don't feel heard, and you're ignored, and you feel unappreciated and unsupported. And you're worried and concerned and anxious. And you're really disgusted about this whole thing. And you're sad because you've lost connection. And you feel depressed and upset and unhappy. And you feel a little bit of shame and embarrassment. And at the very bottom, you feel completely abandoned and rejected and betrayed and all alone. And you feel unloved and unlovable.
So basically, what it does is connect with your deeper inner self about the current emotions that the person might be having.
That's right.
And of course, that goes coordinated also with appearance and behavior.
That's right. And so, did you feel how you started to relax?
Yeah.
And that happens to everybody. So now you're not even upset and you relaxed. And that's the effect that this has when you're dealing with an angry person. So although it's very easy to describe how
you
to
create a method of that the person in front of the other person understands fully the person that is angry. So of course, knowing that someone understands you, you're starting to de-escalate your mindset and whatever anger that you have, because you know the person understands you.
That's right. You feel heard and validated.
Yeah.
And basically your brain calms down. Now, what makes it work so well is that all human beings are emotional. We're not rational beings. We're emotional. And we all experience essentially the same emotions. They vary from culture to culture, but the same. All humans experience the same basic emotions, so that we can, with a rarely small vocabulary of emotions, we can cover most instances. I think in my matrix of emotions, there are probably about 50 different emotions, maybe not even that many, 40 words. And so you learn how to categorize emotions in 7 layers. And once you've got that figured out, and then you learn the script, every single time it's going to be the same script, maybe with a few different substitutions, but everybody has the same feelings. So all you have to do is learn the script and learn how to plug in the appropriate emotions, and it works every single time. It's easy to learn. It takes about 6 to 8 weeks to master it, and you'll never have a fight or argument again in your life with anybody.
So when you started to experimenting, this study, what was your own reaction on the first first interactions? Let's just say.
Well, first of all, stunned surprise that these people calmed down in the way that they did. And then after I reflected on what I had done, I was terrified, because I was engaging in something that culture says that you should never do.
Yeah.
Which is tell people what they're feeling. We live in a culture where emotions are bad, emotions are evil, emotions make you weak, emotions make you vulnerable. You should be avoiding emotions at all costs. And oh, by the way, if you're telling people what they're feeling, you're invading their privacy, you're getting way too intimate with them. And especially if you're a stranger, you're being presumptive, patronizing, and rude.
Yeah.
These are all the things that came up for me, and they come up for every single one of my students, but they came up for me first, and I didn't have anybody coaching me on how to do this. So, and then I was terrified that I built spent a lot of time building up my reputation as an effective peacemaker and mediator. And if I start going into this kind of emotional work, that people are going to think that I'm really crazy and I'm going to risk my reputation. And, so it was scary. And what I learned, but I also felt like, but this really works. So I learned two things. One, all of those fears I had were my own fears. And none of it was justified, because experientially, not only what would typically happen is that when I would de-escalate somebody, they would thank me profusely for listening to them. So they didn't feel like I was being rude. They didn't feel like I was being patronized. They didn't feel like I was intruding in their privacy. They felt exactly the opposite. I cannot tell you, Julio, how many times people have said, finally, somebody understands me.
Yeah.
And the second thing I learned was that when I was working in litigated disputes with lawyers and clients, when I would affect label the clients, the lawyers would take me aside later and thank me and say, thank you for listening to my client. She really felt heard. And that made a huge difference. And so lawyers would start bringing me more work, especially in their difficult cases, because I was able to work with angry, upset, emotional clients and get them calmed down and help them work through the problem. So all of my fears were completely unfounded. But what I found is, as I teach this, is that people come into working with me, and they all have the same fears that I had. And so what we have to do is work through the fears by practicing the skills in super safe environments until they begin to see the results they get, and they start getting confidence that not only does this work, it's extraordinary what it does. And all of the fears they have go away because they see that this way of being with other people, I call it listening others into existence, is extraordinarily powerful.
Of course, you of course had the experience to deal, because there's also people, I imagine they are with different minor stages, like psychopaths or things like this. So, have you ever experienced to talk with a person with such stage mentally, or just people that were just violent?
So I've worked with all different kinds of people.
Yeah.
And I've had many people work with different kinds of people. I know that number one, this works with people who have Asperger's syndrome. I know this works on children on the autistic spectrum. I know this works with elderly people who are suffering from dementia or Alzheimer's. Emotions are the last thing to go. I've worked with some really difficult people in prison, and I know that it works with different personality types in prison. The only personality type that we did not have success with was one man who was probably an overt maladaptive narcissist.
Okay.
And that's somebody who's clinically narcissistic. We're all narcissists. We have to have narcissism or we can never survive. And we tend to use the term narcissist a lot, when we're talking about people who seem to be self-centered.
Yeah.
But there's something way beyond that called the overt maladaptive narcissist. And this guy just did not respond to anything we did. He's the only guy we ever kicked out of the program. Of the thousands and thousands of inmates, there's only one guy we kicked out. We said, we can't, we gave you 4 years. You're just not changing. This is not for you. So I would say that of all the different personality types, and I included that psychopath and sociopathy,
sure.
The overt maladaptive narcissist is probably the one person that does not, they'll respond to this in the sense that they'll calm down, but their behaviors will not change.
Would you think it's because they really just want to hear themselves and they don't want to hear no one else? Because, that's the mentality of a narcissist, deeply.
Well, I think that's the behavior we see, but the cause of the behavior is deep emotional wounding.
Okay.
as a child. They've been horribly emotionally abused as children, and so they develop narcissism, overt maladaptive narcissism, as a means of self-protection, and it becomes so deeply embedded in them that it's extraordinarily difficult for them to change. So I think that's what's going on.
Sure, sure. Thanks for sharing that, by the way. So when you started to build up your book, was it during this stage, or you started to write it just even before you started this program?
Well, no, actually, I published my third book. It was with Prometheus Press and Prometheus Publishing in 2013. I wasn't really intending on writing another book, and my incarcerated students knew that I was a author, and they started pestering me for a book that they could share with their families, because they were learning and growing, and their families could see that this transformation was going on and said, "What are you learning in prison? You're a very different person now." And they couldn't really explain it very well, so they wanted me to write a book to do that, and so I did. And I started writing the book in 2016, and it's kind of a funny story how the book came about. But anyways, it was picked up by Beyond Words, Adria Simon and Schuster in the fall of 2016, and it was published in September of 2017. And that's how and in the book, I talk a lot about prison and peace, and I have a lot of stories from prison of what my students in prison learned about affect labeling and de-escalating, that sort of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, from the conversation we had previously and the contents of your bio, I can see that you teach also a lot of compassion, humility. So, I mean, I think it's a combined circle, right? Putting all these skills together that help people to, as you could say, de-escalate their behavior and how they see society. So, as your experience as expert, clearly, what do you think, in this matter for people like, the way they got into jail, how to not get in there, and what do you think should change in society today?
Well, if I had a magic wand and could wave it over the world,
Sure.
I would have every parent learning and mastering these skills, and I would have them begin to teach their 2, 3, and 4-year-olds these skills. And that would create such a dramatic shift if every parent could do this, for a whole bunch of different reasons. But one of which is the studies show that when parents engage in affect labeling their children, listening to and reflecting their children's emotions, parents become emotional coaches. And children that are fortunate enough to grow up in that kind of environment, by the age of 12, are 2 to 3 grade levels academically ahead of their peers. They have the maturity of most 21-year-olds, and they are extremely well liked and well integrated into their social systems, and they do not engage in fights or arguments. So it's powerful. And parents report that when they engage in affect labeling with even a 2-year-old, within 3 to 4 months, all of the tantrums go away, and the children be calm. And what's even more fun is that the children start affect labeling without being taught, just by modeling, by parents modeling, that they start affect labeling their parent. "Mommy, you're really angry right now." And it's amazing. So if this work were to have a profound effect worldwide, it would be teaching young people who are having babies how to listen to emotions, how to listen to each other's emotions as a couple, and how to listen to and reflect and coach the emotions of their children. And I would say that within 10 or 15 years, if every single parent did that, we would live in a very different world.
Yeah, I think so too. I mean, according to what you just mentioned, it's like teaching humanity, which is an episode I just recorded previously. I think it's values that society has been losing for lack of communication, I would say. I mean, in these days, I think society shifted a lot. Also because of a lot of variables. We had a lot of recessions, financial, people struggle, so they lose time with things that are important, and they don't realize that. And
That's
in
right.
the end, for example, you have a family, and dad and mother maybe work 12, 13 hours a day, so they practically don't see themselves.
That's right.
Children they have is taken care of by a third party, um, which in the end, the education is not the same because they're not being taught by their own parents.
Right.
So I guess it's a mix of situations that, in the end, creates this, let's just say, angering people in some situations because
That's right.
it all started with a wrong circle. We have a society that today, I would say, I mean, I'll say it anyway because I have no fears in talking what it is. Society in these days is very selfish, and they really lack a lot of humanity. Uh, People are afraid to be humbled. People are afraid to, go to other people with their own open feelings because they're afraid they can be rejected or be harmed mentally, etc. But in the end, if everyone is like that, you create really a unified communication deeply, that everyone will have an understanding of each other. And I think that's what's missing on this society. I mean, what do you think?
I agree. I agree with everything. I think the problem is that we have been lied to for 4,000 years, and we've been told that we are rational beings. What make essential human nature is rationality, and the science, and as a result of that, we judge everything based on this thing called rationality. But if you really ask yourself, well, what does it mean to be rational? Nobody can ever come up with a good answer. And so rationality is a myth, and the word
Yeah,
itself has no meaning. There's no such thing as rationality. We are emotional beings. If we began to recognize that the essential human nature is to be emotional, and every decision we make, every behavior we engage in is an emotional decision, we would start looking at each other in a very different light. And instead of getting angry or reactive at somebody else's emotions, we would have compassion, and we would know how to respond to those emotions, and we would be listening in a very different way and reacting to people in a very different way. I think all of the problems that you've talked about, which include poor communication and anger and stress
yeah,
and inability to be present and being inauthentic, all of that stems from teaching that goes all the way back before Plato, for way more than 4,000 years, that teaches us incorrectly that uh, goodness equals rationality, evil equals emotionality. When
yeah,
that's just not true. We are emotional beings. Every decision we make is an emotional decision. And once we begin to recognize that, then we become motivated to learn about, well, how do we learn more about emotions? And then the idea of such as affect labeling begins to make perfect sense. Well, heck, if we're emotional people, then we just need to validate our real experiences as emotional beings. And that solves a lot of problems. So I think that's where the shift has to occur. I think we have to get away from the idea of rationality and begin to change our mindset to recognize that we're emotional beings. And that doesn't mean that we can't engage in critical thinking and problem solving and logic and reasoning. It just means that those are tools, not the essence of who we are. And in order to use those tools, we have to learn how to work with our emotions, to recognize them, validate them, and be compassionate with each other.
of course, of course. I totally agree with you and resonate with you and all that. Also, just to add, I would say that the rationality, as you just mentioned, of course, it's a myth. But sometimes people think that it's sexual the reality, and I think that's where it goes to the swift side. I think people should really, start building their inner self better, in order to first learn with themselves and then try to understand others. Because if you don't understand yourself, it's going to be very hard to understand others too. I mean, people need to understand this too. And some people have a lot of questions inside them. While they have them and they're not being resolved, it's going to be very hard for even the person, he or she, to have this understanding within society. So what
Right.
I advise, yeah, go ahead, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say you're right about that, and the challenge is that the average person grew up in a dysfunctional family. No matter how loving the parents were, they were emotionally abusive, and they didn't even know it. And so we learn by the time we're about between 6 and 8 years old that the universe is an emotionally unsafe place, and so we start building up defenses so we're not hurt, emotionally hurt. It's very painful, and so we build defenses around ourselves so that we're not hurt, so that we can function without being paralyzed by the deep pain of emotional invalidation and rejection. And all those layers of defenses get in the way in adulthood of becoming authentic, because we're uncovering all the pain we experienced in childhood and revisiting that pain and working with it and learning about emotions can be, without help, can be very, very difficult. And I think that's part of the reason why we don't have a lot of people in adulthood getting rid of the childhood trauma, reprogramming themselves, and learning how to use emotions in a positive, powerful way.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think. What do you think about people when they actually? I mean, obviously, some people don't realize they have a problem, or refuse to, to say to anyone they have a problem, which is a mistake. I think everyone should communicate and talk it over to relieve themselves. Because I always say, if you have something that is putting weight on you, you should relieve it. That's the advice I always say, either mentally or even by your own body, because whatever you have in your mind, your body suffers. Because in the end, it's all interconnected.
Right, of course. Well, I mean, I think that's correct, but I think that most people don't have the ability to be able to be self-aware. And so they go through life embodying their stress and their trauma and their unhappiness in their physical bodies, which then, of course, turns into physical illness. And it's and then essentially unaware. And part of this is it's due to all these cultural factors I'm talking about.
Yeah.
And for example, in our educational system, here in North America, the whole educational system is makes a fundamental assumption about human beings, and that is they're rational beings. And the educational system makes a fundamental assumption that children are rational beings, or we should make them rational. And so the whole way that we educate kids is to ignore the emotionality. In fact, we're told as children, don't be emotional. You can't cry, you can't be angry, you can't express emotion. That's wrong. And that's what we learn in school as well as in the family. And that is hugely abusive.
Yeah.
And that's why people cannot or have great difficulty later in life learning how to become emotionally self-aware. It's a big challenge. It was horrible.
And also to express themselves, right? Because not all emotions are bad. I guess that's a big problem. Yeah.
That's right. And that we're not taught the skills that I teach on how to appropriately express emotion and how to validate somebody else's emotional experience. I mean, for me, it was a huge, huge transformation that took a long time, and it was very painful. And I got through it and understood what I was doing, but I mean, it was not easy. And I had discovered some skills that helped, but for the average person, it would be, from my perspective, would be extraordinarily difficult for them to figure this out without learning some basic skills of the type that I teach. So,
What would you recommend for people to start being more self-awareness and to be more caring to, to
Well, I
fellow
think
humans?
that's a great question. And I think the answer is stop looking at the world through the lens of rationality.
Right.
Start when you look at other people, your family, the people you work with, ordinary people, people you read about in the news, recognize that they are all emotional beings and everything they're doing is emotional. And then start learning how to recognize those emotions. And when you have the opportunity, label the emotions. Oh, you're angry, you're frustrated, you feel excluded, whatever it might be. And you can do happy emotions too. Are you really happy? You're excited, you're feeling joy, you feel awestruck. So it can go either way, positive and negative, and start trying to frame the way you see the world in terms of emotions and how people are and yourself are being emotional about stuff rather than through a lens of rationality where we're trying to say people are unemotional, they're like Mr. Spock in Star Trek. They don't have emotions, they're not supposed to have emotions, and any kind of emotional behavior or experience or expression is wrong. We want to, I think we need to change that. And try to have compassion with people who are emotional and help them with their emotions by labeling what they're experiencing and help them process their own emotions. That would be huge.
What I usually say to people, it's you need to learn also how to evaluate yourself.
Well,
Um,
you're right. But here's the beauty of it. When you start learning how to affect label other people, I start learning how to listen to the emotions of others. I automatically am reprogramming myself to
yeah,
become aware of my own emotions.
yeah,
And I don't have to go through any kind of therapy or anything to learn how to do that. It just happens automatically.
yeah.
And so what I've witnessed with tens of thousands of people is that as they learn how to affect label and listen to and read emotions of other people, their own emotional intelligence increases because they're becoming emotionally self-aware, and that allows them to emotionally self-regulate. And they've already learned empathy because affect labeling is empathy. And it's just a magical, virtuous cycle of growth that happens.
I also found in society, I done a lot of experience in this, and I always find that maybe an average, like for every 20 people, only one reacts correctly, and the other 19, they always try to make it look as someone else's fault.
Right.
So I also say that, I mean, of course, it's totally wrong, and I always tell, to people saying you should evaluate first yourself to see if it's really the other person's fault, because most of the times it's just because it's easy to get away from either responsibility or something that was not done correctly, and this is. I was to say like automated factor that most people do. Now, my question is, you as an expert, is why do people actually react like this most of the times?
Because it's the way our brains are designed. So we have two fundamental decision-making systems in our brain. And for shortcuts, they're called system one and system two. Um, System one thinking is very fast, emotional, intuitive, quick, and effortless. System two thinking is very slow, painful, conservative. It's what we call thinking.
Right.
So when we're talking about the situation you're talking about, where we're quick to blame other people, we actually, that's called the fundamental attribution bias. And that is a bias that arises from system one thinking. Rather than sitting down and doing some self-reflection, which is system two thinking, it's much easier and effortless to engage in system one thinking and blame the other person reflexively because it's effortless to do that. It takes no effort to blame somebody else. It takes a lot of effort to do a self-reflection and say, wait a minute, I've got the same problem. So let me just give you an example. So somebody shows up late for a meeting.
Yeah.
You'll think to yourself, what an asshole. This person just has no respect for anybody and shows up late, is just showing, it has no integrity.
Yeah.
And then you show up late for the meeting and you say, well, it's not my fault. I got jammed on the freeway and then I couldn't find a parking spot. And then I couldn't do this, I couldn't do that. I'm a perfectly good
That's
human
always
being.
an excuse.
So that's called the fundamental attribution error. And it is a classic symptom of inappropriate system one thinking, but we all engage in it and we can't help ourselves because system one thinking allows us to conserve energy. The brain is a metabolic miser. In other words, the brain really is designed to help us use as few calories as possible to stay alive. And so system one thinking has a very low metabolic demand. And so we're always going to go to system one before we do anything else, unless we engage in this override function that pumps us into system two, which is a huge metabolic demand. So system two thinking is reserved for situations where we really do have to think. I mean, something might be dangerous and we have to really process the information. And as a result of this, in our everyday social lives, almost everything we do is going to be system one, and we're not going to think about it, and we're not going to put any effort into it. And so it's really easy to blame you, and it's really easy to excuse me. And we do that because it's effortless.
Right.
And we don't know any better. Most people don't know anything about system one, system two. They don't realize about the cognitive bias, for example, the fundamental attribution bias. And so they just engage in this behavior. It's automatic behavior, and they don't even think about it. And that's why they do it. And even when you point it out to them, they don't change because they're not trained how to think, how to step back and reflect.
Would you think it's possible for people to change that reflection? Or
well, we're born with these cognitive biases. There are about 150 of them, and we really can't change the biases. But what we can do is be aware of circumstances when the bias arises, and when we experience the bias, to say, "Oh, wait a minute! I just blamed Julio for showing up to this meeting late and thought he was a complete asshole for doing that. That's the fundamental attribution bias. Why am I doing that?" And then I can engage in a little bit of system two thinking. Okay, so what's really going on here? And we can train ourselves to do that, but it takes training. It takes training and practice and discipline, which is a lot of people lack. And so they don't do it. They don't have the training. They don't have the persistence. They don't have the discipline. And so they just engage in what automatically their brain patterns have them do, which is system one thinking and with cognitive biases kicking in.
So would you say that is an automated natural reaction from human beings, or is that people usually really hide that and just react like that just because it's easy?
It's easy. It's easy, and it's innate.
Okay.
I mean, we are born with a lot of these biases, and because they had some kind of adaptive advantage from an evolutionary biology perspective, they provided an adaptive advantage to early hominids. So they've been hardwired into us. They're baked into us. And we can't change them, but we can become aware of them. And once we're aware of them, then we can hopefully modulate our behaviors accordingly.
Nice. Amazing. Outstanding. I mean, I'm really learning myself a lot of your knowledge and your skills, and I'm pretty sure everyone will find this very insightful. So, Doug, how do you see yourself within the next 5-10 years? I mean, will you continue to do what you're doing?
Yeah, I'm going to answer yes. I'm 75 years old, so my shelf life isn't extended out there a long time. I mean, I hope it is, but you never know. My goal is to continue to teach and talk about these skills and advocate for a different way of being as a human being. And I'm going to continue to do that for as long as I can, with the hopes that I touch enough people that there can be a shift in the way that we think about each other and the way that we treat each other. And that we begin to recognize the limits of rationality and start seeing ourselves as emotional beings, which leads us into being able to validate our emotional experiences. That's what I hope for.
Sure, absolutely. So, I mean, I really admire you for all you've been doing in society. I mean, I wish there was thousands and thousands of people like you out there, honestly, because this is really needed. I mean, people to create self-awareness in other people, to create a better society, a future better generation, let's just say, and of course the values. create these values that are needed in this society, which are being lost from generations passed on until
Right.
today's days. Of course, we have been discussed, a lot of factors, but of course, those factors can be changed. It's just a matter if you have the will and that push to try to learn or to make a better version of yourself. Everything is possible. In
Right.
the end.
Exactly. So mostly it's knowledge. Once we have the knowledge, then we can make the decision to change, and then we can learn the skills that help us make that change. But it's getting people to understand foundationally that we are not who we think we are. And once we begin to recognize our true human nature, then that opens the door to growth and change and development.
Absolutely. So, Doug, if people want to reach you, how is the best way to reach you?
My website is dougnoll.com,
Okay.
DOUGNOLL.com. My email is doug@dougnoll.com. Easiest way to reach me is just to email me, and I answer. I'm a sole practitioner, so I don't have a staff, and I answer all my own emails. And of course, you can go to my website. It's a chock full of content about everything that I've talked about today, plus a lot more. I have online courses. I do, of course, my books, and I work with teams and individuals and couples, teaching them how to stop fights and arguments forever in their lives by learning how to listen to and validate emotions. And so I accept engagements all over the world to help people that really want to dive into this and learn how to learn these magical skills that will transform lives.
Outstanding. So, Doug, as I usually say before we close, I always ask our guests to say a power message to better future generations. So, what will be your power message today?
I think the core message that I have is that we have labored under myths around human nature for 4,000 years. We're now in the 21st century. We're on the cusp of a massive, massive shift that we've never seen before with the advent of AI and robotics and different kinds of energy production. The human beings, we're going to go through a revolution in the next 10 to 15 years that is unprecedented. And if we want to really navigate this revolution effectively, we have to start taking time to engage in an internal revolution about ourselves. And we have to get away from the old Freudian ideas, the old psychology that's not grounded in science. And we have to start understanding the limitations of rationality, the limitations of our thinking, and accept that we are emotional beings, not rational beings, and then work on the skills that strengthen our emotionality. And that way we can navigate this coming revolution with a lot more grace and ease than we will if we stick to the old ways.
Outstanding. I have no words for that. I think that was really remarkable finishing speech, and it was really outstanding conversation today. By the way, Doug interviewed me some time ago on Authority Magazine. He's also an editor there. He did a huge amount of interviews to significant amount of people, which are very known in the market too. And what else? Do you work also for other magazines, Doug, or only
I'm not. I'm not working with Authority anymore.
Oh, okay, okay,
Yitzi Weiner, editor in chief, is a wonderful human being. I just didn't have the time for it.
right.
He is doing amazing work, and I just respect the heck out of him. And I've really enjoyed the couple of years that I worked with Authority and was able to interview, as you said, over 1,000 leaders of different kinds. It was amazing work.
Yeah.
I have my own podcast, Listening with Leaders, that I use to talk to people about what makes them different and successful. I'm working on my 5th book on leadership empathy. And I just every day go out and try to do good in the world and serve humanity in whatever way I'm called to serve.
I have a big admiration for you, Doug. I hope you continue all these efforts and just push it up. And I really admire all the work you do in people and in society itself. By the way, I actually talked with an interview yesterday with Itzi.
Well, you did. Okay.
Yeah, I talked with him yesterday. Actually,
He's a
wasn't by
great
coincidence. Yeah,
he's a great human being,
yeah, he
and
is.
he's
Yeah,
doing great work. So I just admire the heck out of him. So
yeah,
good.
absolutely, absolutely. So, Doug, by the way, your books are on sale on Amazon or a specific
Yeah,
port?
my books are all of. Well, I don't know about my second book, but I think most of my books are available on Amazon
Amazon.
and all the usual places. I mean, these are, you know, they're still in print, and you can. Most of them are still in print. You can still grab them. Um,
And people can
in all
find
the
the
usual places.
links in your webpage. Are
Yeah,
they
I've
on?
got. I don't know if I've got all my books on my website, but certainly De-escalate is
Okay,
available on my website.
okay, wonderful. So just look up. Was it dougnoll.com, right?
DougNoll.com, right?
So everyone to check it up, and I really advise you for you to review and get definitely de-escalate book from Doug Noll for sure. So Doug, it was really insightful, pleasant, conversation that I had with you today. I'm really grateful for your time today, and I just wanted to tell you that keep it up, and you have really a big admirer here from the sun.
Well, thank you, Julio.
Thank you very
Appreciate it.
much.
You're
So
welcome.
for everyone else, see you again in the next episode. Talk to you soon. Bye bye.